We are on to file item 11.
Oh, new one. Okay. Thank you.
Looks like one of our resources issue may be enough seats for all the panelists.
Okay, well, thank you. We had to do a little, as you can see, rearranging of chairs, and we're going to be a large group up here today. So, all right. Okay, so what I was thinking I would do is just very quickly run through how we're going to roll this panel presentation and presentations out. That way, I'm hoping it'll be a little easier for folks to kind of follow along, and we won't be doing a lot of back and forth here at the table. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it off with some introductory remarks and kind of set the stage for why we have the panel that we have here before us today and the importance of that. And I'm going to turn it over to Kayvon, and I should introduce Kayvon. I don't think he's been up here very often, but Kayvon Sam is our lead engineer for the water resource side of our shop within our organization. And he is the gentleman who's pulled together the staff report and this wonderful panel today. So I'm going to have him walk through just a little bit in detail some of the Delta Plan recommendations around groundwater, as well as the California Water Action Plan and the recommendations related to groundwater in there as well. And then I'll have him introduce the panelists. We'll run through all of the presentations, and then I'll wrap it up with some staff recommendations for potential next steps beyond this panel today. So we can get closer here. Okay, so Jessica Pearson did a very nice job this morning setting the stage for the importance of pulling all of these folks together and for some of the current state-level efforts that are happening right now that are focusing on the issues around groundwater and creating momentum around potential groundwater management reform. And you'll be hearing from some of the panelists about these state-level efforts, including the State Water Resources Control Board, as well as more recently an initiative that's come out of the governor's office to convene a diverse group of stakeholders to provide policy recommendations on groundwater management reform. So specifically today, what you'll be hearing from a panel of local, state, and federal agency experts on groundwater. They'll be talking about their agency's efforts to conduct research related to groundwater and its management, to implement recommendations that are in our Delta Plan, also to implement local efforts related to groundwater management, to implement actions included in the California Water Action Plan, and as I just mentioned more recently, the initiative that's come out of the governor's office about convening a stakeholder group. So in addition to these current events and the renewed focus on groundwater management and groundwater reform as a result really of the drought that we find ourselves in now, I wanted to kind of run through some of the other reasons, some of the other issues, kind of the longer term set of reasons why the council, amongst all these other agencies, has identified groundwater issues and management as a priority, and as such has put 4 recommendations in the Delta Plan that help to propose to address some of these issues. So my job is to kind of set up the problems and some of the long-term needs. And then I'll turn it over to Kayvon to kind of walk through some of the recommendations that the council has put in the Delta Plan and that we also find in the California Water Action Plan that will help to address these issues. So very quickly, as all of you know, groundwater is a significant portion of the state's water portfolio, and as stated in the Delta Plan, it makes up about 20% of both the agricultural and urban water supply for the state. There is a direct relationship between the Delta and the health of the Delta and groundwater management, especially in the Central Valley. If the Delta is in a healthy state, if water supplies are ample, then there is the ability to replenish groundwater aquifers, as well as to, in some cases, reduce the reliance of groundwater as for water supply. But when we find ourselves in a scenario that we're in now in terms of the Delta's health in decline, water supplies are reduced, the exports are reduced out of the Delta, we find that the reliance on groundwater increases and in some cases speeds up some of the impacts, for example, of groundwater overdraft that we have seen over time and may be exacerbated by the current conditions we find ourselves in. Subsidence issues. I know we have Michelle Sneed here from USGS today, who's been here before, to give us an update on some of the issues revolving around subsidence and groundwater aquifers. We also, is identified in one of the recommendations in the Delta Plan, we suffer from a lack of current knowledge and adequate information to really get a handle on the status of the groundwater basins within the state. And I know Mary Scruggs is going to talk speak a little bit to that point in her presentation. And lastly, again, just bringing it back to the fact that this year especially, in the 3 years that we've been suffering from the drought, has this renewed focus on groundwater management, groundwater issues. So the last thing I think I want to say before I turn it over to Kayvon is that we have Mr. Walt Ward here from Stanislaus County, who's going to talk to us about some of the local level efforts. We've been really familiar with the state level efforts, but I think just this week there's been some major movement and progress in terms of Stanislaus County. They've convened a water advisory committee, which will advise their county board of supervisors on matters pertaining to groundwater and groundwater management. So with that, I think I'm going to physically hand the microphone over without breaking any glasses.
I trust the red button's on. So just to kind of go over what Cindy touched upon, some of the details of our Delta Plan and the Governor's Office's California Water Action Plan, what's contained in there, and kind of give you an update. So our Delta Plan had extensive discussion on the groundwater management and sustainable groundwater. And just to remind you, we had 4 recommendations that dealt with that. And the panel members today can actually give an update on the status of all 4 of those recommendations. So first of all, in our Delta Plan, we had a recommendation to update Bulletin 118. That hasn't been done in the last 12 years. And the reason that we put that in there was because knowledge of the groundwater situation is paramount. We put a deadline of the end of this year, and that deadline is a result of next year is the deadline for the locals to do their urban water management plans and their agricultural water management plans, and we felt that they would need to have the knowledge that would be in Bulletin 118 or similar plans to be able to complete their own local water management plans. We had a second recommendation that stated that areas that get water from the State Water Project or from the Delta Watershed should implement groundwater management plans. And to remind you, as Cindy touched upon, if we are exporting water from the Delta, as you know, the idea was to help supplement local groundwater sources. So it's probably paramount that those people be an example of good groundwater stewards, and not look at the State Water Project or Central Valley Project as a additional source and at the same time deplete their limited groundwater resources. We have a recommendation that says that we should recover and manage critically overdrafted groundwater basins. And again, this is paramount, that we should be able to identify which basins are in danger, which ones aren't critical. I don't believe that information is widely known, and those should be the priority for the state efforts and for the local efforts to adjust a problem. And the last recommendation from the Delta Plan had to do with beneficial uses and the protection thereof. And this is more of a state water board's purview and has to do with groundwater quality. And we recommended that they complete a work plan, a strategic work plan on groundwater. And we're going to hear about that today. And really quickly, the Governor's Office's California Water Action Plan also identified 5 priorities and actions that they would take. Similar to the Delta Plan, the completion of Bulletin 118 and CASGEM is a priority for them. We'll hear about the status of that. They're looking for the Governor's Office is going to work with the legislature to identify some policy recommendations to empower the locals, and also to give power to the states maybe to come in and help with groundwater management, sustainable groundwater management. The Water Action Plan is going to help with groundwater storage. There's going to be some funding there, and with groundwater recharge. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. And today we have Michelle Sneed from the USGS. She's a hydrologist. She was the author of a 2013 report on subsidence in the Central Valley. I'll read it. The land subsidence along the Delta Mendota Canal in northern part of the San Joaquin Valley from 2003 through 2010. I'd like to remind everybody that she was here in 2011 and gave a great presentation. This is more of an update of what we've learned, and hopefully it's good news, but for those of you who've read the report, unfortunately, it's not. We also have Mary Scruggs. She's a supervising geologist with DWR. She is, I believe, the program manager for Bulletin 118 and CASGEM. So she is one of the experts for the state on groundwater conditions and basin management. Next to her is Eric Oppenheimer. He's a director at the State Water Resources Control Board. He's in charge of the board's strategic plan for groundwater, and he's going to talk about that effort. Next to him, we have Walter Ward. As Cindy mentioned, he's new to the county. He is, I think, in his first 2 weeks, he's got bombarded with requests, including ours, to come here and present. And last night, yesterday, they had their first meeting. They convened a water advisory committee to deal with groundwater. Walter is co-heading that, I believe, and it's a very challenging job, and he will discuss that. And lastly, we have Andrew Fallon from the California Water Foundation, and he also is, I think, relatively new to his position, and we called upon him as he was unpacking his boxes. And he's going to talk about the administration's efforts and tie it all together in some of the legislative policy suggestions that they're looking for, and how his organization is helping to facilitate that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.